Number 1. The Bermuda Triangle has anomalous disappearance rates. Picture a stretch of ocean drawn between Miami, the island of Bermuda, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. That rough triangular shape covering about 500,000 square miles of the western Atlantic is what most people imagine when they hear the phrase Bermuda Triangle. The first thing worth knowing is that this boundary is not an official designation. The United States Coast Guard does not recognize it as a hazard zone. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration does not list it as anomalous. The legend was largely shaped by writers like Vincent Gaddis, who coined the phrase in 1964 in an article for Argosy magazine, and Charles Berlitz, whose 1974 book turned the idea into a global brand. Insurers, pilots, sailors, and pulp publishers all played a role in concentrating scattered Atlantic incidents under one mythic label. The area inside that imaginary triangle happens to be one of the most heavily traveled stretches of ocean on the planet. Major shipping lanes from the Panama Canal pass through it. Cruise routes to the Caribbean cross it daily. Commercial fishing fleets, recreational boaters, and military aircraft from naval air stations in Florida all share the same waters. The simple statistical reality is that more traffic produces more accidents, even if the underlying risk per voyage is perfectly average. Lloyd's of London, the famous insurance market, examined claims in this region back in the 1970s and concluded that vessel losses inside the triangle were no higher than in other heavily trafficked waters. They charge no extra premium for transit. That detail rarely makes it into the documentaries. There are at least 3 competing explanations for the legend. The mainstream theory holds that accident rates are statistically ordinary once you correct for traffic volume, weather exposure, vessel type, and the quality of historical record-keeping. The historical and media-driven theory argues that disappearances became famous because newspapers and books grouped unrelated events under one memorable name, with authors quietly shifting the boundaries of the triangle to include or exclude cases as needed. The fringe and speculative theory proposes magnetic anomalies, methane gas eruptions from seabed hydrate deposits, electromagnetic fog, or even time distortions. But none of these has produced repeatable instrument data. The natural hazards in the region are real. Hurricanes form in the tropical Atlantic and sweep through the triangle every season. Sudden squalls can disable a small boat in minutes. The Gulf Stream, that warm river of seawater moving at speeds up to 4 knots, can carry wreckage hundreds of miles from a vessel's last known position. In the era before the global positioning system became fully operational in 1993, navigation depended on magnetic compasses, dead reckoning, and intermittent radio contact. Pilot fatigue, fuel exhaustion, and disorientation in featureless ocean accounted for many of the famous aircraft cases, including the disappearance of Flight 19, a group of 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, on December 5, 1945. Today, satellite tracking, the automatic identification system known as AIS, weather radar, and Coast Guard databases have shrunk the mystery considerably. The ocean does not need magic to be dangerous. Physics, weather, currents, and human error are more than enough. But if disappearance has a rational explanation, what about the creatures rumored to live in those waters and the strange rules they supposedly obey? Number 2. Sharks die if they stop swimming. The cinematic image is familiar. A shark circles endlessly in dark water, doomed to suffocate the moment it stops. This idea entered popular culture through films, aquarium displays, and decades of nature programming. It contains a small grain of truth wrapped around a much larger error. Sharks need water moving across their gills to breathe. They do not all need to keep their bodies in motion to make that happen. The breathing question comes down to anatomy. Gills are respiratory surfaces lined with thin tissue where dissolved oxygen diffuses from seawater into the bloodstream. There are 3 main ways sharks move water across these surfaces. The first is ram ventilation, in which forward swimming forces water through the open mouth and out across the gill arches. The second is buccal pumping, where muscles in the mouth and throat actively draw water in and push it across the gills, even while the animal is motionless. The third involves spiracles, small paired openings located behind the eyes in many bottom-dwelling species. Spiracles allow water to be drawn in from above when a shark is resting on the seafloor with its mouth pressed into sand. The mainstream view among shark biologists is that only a subset of species are obligate ram ventilators, meaning they must keep moving to breathe. Many other species can stop, rest, and survive indefinitely. The historical and aquarium-driven theory holds that the misconception spread because the sharks most often filmed and exhibited, like makos and great whites, were the active pelagic species that genuinely do swim continuously. The fringe and speculative framing sometimes labels sharks as primitive biological machines, but their respiratory diversity is anything but primitive. Evolution has produced hundreds of breathing solutions across more than 500 shark species. The nurse shark, a common Atlantic species, lies motionless on the seafloor for hours, pumping water with its buccal muscles. White-tip reef sharks gather in caves during the day and rest in groups, sometimes stacked on top of one another. Wobbegongs, the carpet sharks of Australasian waters, lie camouflaged on reefs waiting for prey to wander past. By contrast, great whites, makos, salmon sharks, and whale sharks are linked to ram ventilation and continuous travel. The ecological pattern is reasonably clear. Open ocean predators tend toward constant movement, partly for breathing and partly for hunting across vast empty volumes. Bottom dwellers and reef residents have evolved alternatives that match their habitats. Sleep in sharks is not the same as mammalian sleep. Studies of species like the draftboard shark, conducted by researchers including Michael Kelly at La Trobe University, suggest that sharks enter periods of reduced metabolic activity that may serve a similar restorative function. Currents passing through caves and channels can ventilate a stationary shark without any swimming at all. The simplification of all this into one universal rule was partly the work of dramatic narration in nature documentaries during the 1970s and 1980s. Today, aquariums, fisheries managers, and tagging programs work from species-specific physiology rather than blanket assumptions. So if some sharks rest comfortably on the seafloor, what happens to the more delicate creatures who live far below them when humans try to bring them up? Number 3, deep-sea creatures explode the moment you bring them to the surface. A viral image circulates online showing a deep-sea fish hauled up in a trawl, its eyes bulging and stomach pushed out through its mouth. The caption usually claims the animal exploded from the change in pressure. This description is dramatic and partially wrong. What actually happens is a medical condition called barotrauma, and understanding it requires a small detour into gas physics. Pressure increases by roughly 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. A fish living at 300 meters experiences about 30 atmospheres of pressure, or roughly 440 pounds per square inch. When that fish is brought rapidly to the surface, the external pressure drops and any gas trapped inside its body expands. This follows Boyle's law, formulated by the Anglo-Irish chemist Robert Boyle in 1662, which states that gas volume increases as pressure decreases. The most vulnerable structure is the swim bladder, a gas-filled organ that many fish use to control buoyancy. As the fish rises, the gas inside the swim bladder expands, sometimes to several times its original volume. The result is bloating, eye displacement, organ herniation, and in some cases the stomach being pushed out through the mouth in a phenomenon called stomach eversion. None of this is a cinematic explosion. It is a slow internal pressure injury. The mainstream theory of deep-sea surface damage points to gas expansion combined with handling stress, temperature shock, and the time delay between capture and inspection. The historical and fishing industry theory adds that nets, hooks, and rough deck handling worsen the appearance of specimens. The fringe and speculative theory imagines deep-sea bodies as impossible surface creatures, but the explanation is ordinary. Physics combined with cellular chemistry adapted to high pressure. Many deep-sea animals do not explode or even bloat noticeably because they have little or no gas-filled space. Gelatinous species like jellyfish, comb jellies, and siphonophores tend to collapse, deform, or dissolve visually rather than burst. Invertebrates often suffer at the molecular level. Their proteins, cell membranes, and enzymes have evolved to function under extreme pressure, and surface conditions can cause those structures to malfunction even without dramatic external damage. The blobfish, frequently mocked as the world's ugliest animal after a photograph circulated in 2013, looks completely different in its native habitat at 600 to 1200 meters depth. The famous melted appearance is a surface artifact, not the animal's natural form. Rockfish brought up by sport fishers regularly show classic barotrauma signs, which is why fisheries managers in Alaska, California, and Oregon now require descending devices to return undersized fish to depth where their swim bladders can recompress. Modern research uses pressure-retaining traps and pressurized aquaria to keep specimens alive at depth conditions during transit to laboratories. The Scripps Institution of Oceanography in the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, often shortened to MBARI, have both developed systems for this purpose. The lesson here is that deep-sea bodies are not magical. They are engineered by pressure, temperature, gas, and chemistry, and they fail in predictable ways when those conditions change, which leads naturally to the place where those conditions are most extreme of all. Number 4. The Mariana Trench is bottomless or a portal to Earth's interior. The Mariana Trench, located in the western Pacific east of the Mariana Islands, is the deepest known place in the ocean. The deepest point within it, called Challenger Deep, sits roughly 10,935 meters below sea level, depending on the measurement method. The trench is not bottomless. The trench is not a portal. It is a measured geological feature, mapped in detail and visited multiple times by humans and machines. Before modern sonar, depth measurement was painfully slow. Crews of the HMS Challenger, the British research ship that sailed from 1872 to 1876, lowered weighted ropes by hand. They recorded a depth of about 8,184 meters near the trench, which gave the deep its name. Modern bathymetry uses multi-beam sonar systems that fan out hundreds of acoustic beams from a ship's hull and time the return of each pulse. Surveys by the United States Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping and Japan's Marine Earth Science and Technology Agency, known as JAMSTEC, have refined Challenger Deep's measurement multiple times since the 1950s. The mainstream geological theory explains the trench through plate subduction. The Pacific Plate, one of the great oceanic crustal plates, is bending downward and sliding beneath the smaller Mariana Plate at a rate of a few centimeters per year. This subduction process is responsible for the trench shape, the chain of volcanic islands behind it, and frequent deep earthquakes in the region. The historical and geological framing points out that early explorers saw trenches as mysterious cracks in the seafloor before plate tectonics formalized in the 1960s by researchers including Harry Hess and Tuzo Wilson explained the underlying mechanism. The fringe and speculative theory imagines the trench as a doorway to Earth's interior, perhaps connected to the mantle or the core. There is no evidence for any such opening. The mantle lies beneath solid crust, sediment, and rock, not behind an open shaft. The trench has slopes, walls, basins, and accumulated sediment from sinking organic particles, occasional landslides, and biological remains that drift down as marine snow. Pressure at Challenger Deep exceeds 1,000 atmospheres, equivalent to about 16,000 pounds per square inch. That has not stopped exploration. On January 23, 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh descended in the bathyscaphe Trieste. James Cameron made a solo descent in the deep-sea Challenger in 2012. Victor Vescovo, in the submersible Limiting Factor, completed multiple Challenger deep dives starting in 2019. Robotic landers from institutions including the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution have recorded video, collected sediment, and observed life. Microbes thrive in the sediment. Amphipods, snailfish, and other adapted organisms swim or scavenge at full Hadal depth. The trench is not a portal. It is Earth's geology folding itself under predictable laws of plate motion. Knowing how deep it is, however, raises a different question. How much of the rest of the ocean have we actually seen? Number 5, we've only explored 5% of the ocean. The phrase is everywhere. Documentaries quote it. School textbooks repeat it. Ocean advocacy groups put it on posters. The trouble is that the statement collapses several different definitions of exploration into one number, and the number itself depends on which definition you choose. There is mapping, which means knowing the shape of the seafloor. There is visual observation, which means actually seeing it through cameras or human eyes. There is biological sampling, which means cataloging life. And there is process understanding, which means knowing how the system works. Historical context matters. The 5% figure circulated heavily through the 1990s and 2000s as shorthand for ocean ignorance. It was useful because it was memorable, but it became detached from any specific definition. updated mapping figures tracked by the Seabed 2030 initiative led by the Nippon Foundation and the General Bathymetric Chart of the Oceans Group, known as GEBCO, show that 28.7% of the ocean floor has been mapped to modern resolution standards as of April 2026. That is a dramatic improvement from less than 10% in 2017, when the project formally launched. The improvement reflects coordinated ship surveys, satellite-derived bathymetry, and crowdsourced data from commercial vessels. Visual observation tells a different story. Less than 0.001% of the deep seafloor has actually been seen by human eyes or camera lenses. The deep sea, defined as everything below about 200 meters, contains more than 90% of the ocean's habitable volume. Exploring it visually is constrained by ship time, weather, fuel, depth-rated equipment, and the slow speed at which submersibles and remotely operated vehicles can survey ground. A typical research dive covers perhaps 1 square kilometer in a full day. The mainstream view holds that the world has mapped much more ocean than the old 5% claim suggests, but has visually observed and biologically sampled far less than people assume. The historical and institutional framing points out that exploration is concentrated near wealthy countries, established shipping lanes, and accessible coastal waters. Vast stretches of the southern Pacific, Indian Ocean, and polar regions remain thinly surveyed. The fringe and speculative framing sometimes uses the phrase unexplored ocean to imply hidden civilizations, undiscovered megafauna, or sealed ecosystems. But absence of observation is not evidence of fantasy. It is simply absence of observation. Modern tools include autonomous underwater vehicles, gliders that drift on programmed routes, deep-sea landers, and satellite altimetry that infers seafloor shape from sea surface gravity anomalies. Each tool answers a different question. Sonar tells you the shape, cameras tell you what is there, genetic tools tell you what lies there, each adds to a partial picture. The ocean is not merely unexplored, it is unevenly explored by different instruments asking different questions. And among the things those instruments have started to clarify is one of the most enduring sea legends of all. Number 6. Giant squid attack ships and drag sailors down. The image is ancient. A multi-armed monster wraps itself around a wooden ship and pulls the crew into black water. The Kraken, drawn into Norse legend and later mapped onto the seas by writers like Eric Pontoppidan in 1752, was eventually given a real biological name. The animal behind the legend is Archaduthus dux, the giant squid. It is a real species, but it is not a ship hunter. Confirmed specimens of Archaduthus reach about 13 meters from the tip of the mantle to the end of the longest tentacles. The first live giant squid was photographed in its natural habitat in 2004 by Japanese researchers Tsunami Kubodera and Kyoichi Mori, working off the Ogasawara Islands. The first live video of a giant squid in the deep ocean was captured by Kubodera and a team in 2012 in the Pacific. Before that, almost everything science knew came from carcasses washed ashore, partial remains in fishing nets, and stomach contents recovered from sperm whales. The animal has 8 arms, 2 longer feeding tentacles, toothed sucker rings, a sharp parrot-like beak made of chitin, and the largest eyes known in the animal kingdom, sometimes reaching 27 centimeters across. The mainstream theory presents giant squid as deep-sea predators that hunt fish and other squid in the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones, roughly between 300 and 900 meters depth. The historical and folkloric theory traces ship-attacking legends to rare sightings, damaged carcasses, sucker scars on whales, and the natural human tendency to exaggerate sea encounters. The fringe and speculative theory keeps alive the idea of even larger surviving cephalopods capable of sinking vessels, but no specimen, image, or sonar contact supports it. The real predator drama in the deep ocean is not squid versus ship. It is squid versus sperm whale. Sperm whales dive to depths greater than 1,000 meters in pursuit of giant squid and the even larger colossal squid, Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, of Antarctic waters. Evidence comes from squid beaks recovered from sperm whale stomachs, sometimes thousands of them, and from circular sucker scars marked on whale skin. The giant eye of Architeuthis is thought by researchers like Dan Erik Nilsson at Lund University to be specifically adapted for detecting large bioluminescent disturbances caused by approaching whales in nearly total darkness. When a giant squid surfaces near boats, it is usually because the animal is dying, injured, or disoriented. Their soft bodies and deep water physiology are not built for surface conditions. Modern research uses baited deep-sea cameras, environmental DNA sampling that detects shed cells in seawater, and submersible observations to study giant squid more carefully. The animal is no less interesting once demystified. It is a true abyssal predator built by evolution. But living down there is one thing. Surviving the pressure that surrounds it is another challenge entirely. Number 7. The pressure at depth would crush you into pulp instantly. The image of a human body instantly flattened in the abyss is dramatic and largely incorrect. Pressure at depth is dangerous, but not in the way most people picture it. The danger depends on gas spaces, pressure gradients, and exposure time, not on water magically pulping flesh. Hydrostatic pressure is simply the weight of water above a given point. The rule is roughly 1 atmosphere of pressure for every 10 meters of depth. At 100 meters, a diver experiences 10 atmospheres. At 3,800 meters, the average ocean depth pressure reaches about 380 atmospheres. In the Mariana Trench, pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres. These numbers sound apocalyptic, but the human body is mostly water, and water is essentially incompressible compared with gas. The mainstream theory holds that pressure damage to a body or vehicle depends on the difference between internal and external pressure across a structure, the speed of the change, and the presence of gas spaces. The historical and diving medicine framing notes that early diving bells, hard hat suits, and submarines shaped the public fear of crushing depth, especially after dramatic disasters like the loss of the USS Thresher in 1963. The fringe and speculative framing sometimes treats abyssal pressure as supernatural, but it follows fluid mechanics that engineers calculate routinely. Vulnerable gas spaces in a human body include the lungs, sinuses, ears, dental cavities, and any equipment voids in diving gear. Unequal pressure across these spaces causes barotrauma, a condition diving medicine has cataloged in detail since the 19th century. A sealed submersible must resist external pressure with hull geometry and material strength. Spheres distribute compression evenly, which is why deep submersibles like the Trieste, the Alvin, and the Limiting Factor use spherical or near-spherical pressure capsules made from titanium or specialized steels. When a submersible fails, the result is implosion, which is sudden and catastrophic, but it is a vehicle failure, not a body instantly turning to pulp at equal pressure. Scuba divers face a different set of hazards. Nitrogen narcosis impairs judgment at depths beyond about 30 meters as nitrogen accumulates in nervous tissue. Oxygen toxicity becomes dangerous when the partial pressure of oxygen exceeds safe limits, generally around 1.4 to 1.6 atmospheres. Decompression sickness, sometimes called the bends, occurs when nitrogen dissolved in tissues forms bubbles during ascent. Breath hold divers, including freedivers who descend more than 100 meters on a single breath, must contend with lung compression and ascent blackout. Deep-sea animals avoid these problems by avoiding large air spaces and by evolving pressure-adapted proteins and membranes. Researchers, including Paul Yancey at Whitman College, have shown that deep-water fish accumulate compounds like trimethylamine N oxide, abbreviated TMAO, to stabilize their proteins under crushing pressure. Depth is deadly because of physics, not magic. And those same physical laws also explain a wave that fooled the public for generations. Number 8. Tsunamis are towering walls of water out in open ocean. The cinematic image is a vertical wall of water racing across the open sea, sometimes drawn as tall as a skyscraper. The actual offshore form of a tsunami looks almost nothing like that. Out in deep water, a tsunami is a long, fast, low wave that ships often pass through without even noticing. A tsunami is not an ordinary wind-driven wave. Its wavelength, the distance from one crest to the next, can stretch hundreds of kilometers. Its speed in deep ocean reaches around 800 kilometers per hour, comparable to a commercial jetliner. Its open ocean wave height is often less than 1 meter, sometimes only a few centimeters. The energy is spread across the entire water column, not just the surface. This is why a tsunami can pass under a ship at sea with no visible effect. The mainstream theory of tsunami behavior describes generation, propagation, and shoaling. Generation usually occurs through undersea earthquakes that displace large volumes of water, as in the Indian Ocean tsunami of December 26, 2004, or the Tohoku tsunami in Japan on March 11, 2011. Submarine landslides, volcanic flank collapses, and asteroid impacts can also produce tsunamis. Once generated, the wave propagates across the ocean with very low energy loss. The historical and coastal framing reflects the fact that survivors remember walls, bores, drawdowns, and inland flooding, then project that image onto the open ocean. The fringe and speculative theory imagines giant walls everywhere, but the physics tie wave height directly to depth and wavelength. Shoaling is the process that turns a low offshore wave into a coastal disaster. As the wave approaches shallow water, friction with the seafloor slows the front of the wave while the back continues at speed. Energy compresses vertically, wave height grows. Run-up is the maximum vertical distance that water reaches above normal sea level when a tsunami impacts shore. Some recorded run-ups have exceeded 30 meters. The first wave is not always the largest. Tsunami events arrive as wave trains, with surges separated by minutes to hours. Before the wave hits, the sea sometimes draws back dramatically, exposing seafloor that has been submerged for centuries, a phenomenon known as drawdown that gave warning to some survivors of the 2004 event. Coastal geometry shapes destruction. Funnel-shaped bays and harbors amplify wave height through resonance. Reefs, river mouths, and offshore shelves all influence local impact. Modern detection relies on the deep ocean assessment and reporting of tsunami system, known as DART, operated by NOAA. DART buoys use seafloor pressure sensors that detect the passing of a tsunami wave by measuring tiny changes in the weight of water above. Tide gauges, seismic networks, and evacuation maps all contribute to warning systems built after the 2004 catastrophe. A tsunami is terrifying not because it towers offshore, but because the entire ocean column is moving. And while tsunamis hide their power in plain water, another ocean phenomenon hides itself in plain plastic. Number 9. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is a solid floating island of trash. The popular image shows a solid trash island somewhere between Hawaii and California, big enough to walk across or photograph from orbit. The real garbage patch is nothing like that picture. It is a diffuse, planet-scale concentration of mostly small plastic fragments suspended in a rotating current system, and you could sail through the densest part without seeing dramatic surface debris. The phrase garbage patch was popularized by oceanographer Charles Moore after his 1997 sailing trip through the North Pacific subtropical gyre. Moore's articles and follow-up research drew global attention to ocean plastic, but the simplified language combined with aerial graphics and news coverage created a misleading visual. The North Pacific subtropical gyre is a slow rotating current system bounded by the North Pacific Current to the north, the California Current to the east, the North Equatorial Current to the south, and the Kuroshio Current to the west. Within that rotation, convergence zones gather floating material unevenly across millions of square kilometers. The mainstream theory describes the patch as a diffuse concentration of debris, dominated by microplastics and discarded fishing gear. The Ocean Cleanup Foundation, founded by Boy and Slat in 2013, published a peer-reviewed analysis in 2018 estimating that the patch contains approximately 1.8 trillion plastic pieces with a combined mass around 80,000 tons, spread across roughly 1.6 million square kilometers. The historical and media-driven framing emphasizes how cartoon graphics turned dispersed pollution into a false continent. The fringe and speculative framing imagines a single floating platform, but actual surveys consistently show particles, fishing gear, and moving debris, fields, rather than walkable surfaces. Microplastics are plastic fragments smaller than 5 millimeters. They form when sunlight, waves, and salt break larger items into smaller pieces. They are the dominant component of the patch by particle count, though fishing gear, often called ghost nets, accounts for a large share by mass. Vertical mixing pushes plastic below the surface layer, where wind and waves cannot easily concentrate it for cleanup. Some plastic sinks after biofouling, the process by which marine organisms grow on debris and increase its density. Satellites cannot easily resolve the patch because the debris is sparse, mixed with seawater, often submerged, and constantly moving with currents. Wildlife impacts include entanglement in fishing line, ingestion of fragments by sea turtles and seabirds like the Laysan albatross, gut blockages, starvation, and chemical transfer from plastics to tissues. Floating plastic can also act as a raft, carrying coastal organisms across ocean basins to new ecosystems. Cleanup is genuinely difficult. Filtering microplastics at ocean scale risks harming plankton, the foundation of marine food webs. River interception, gear recovery programs, and material redesign at the manufacturing stage are increasingly seen as more effective than ocean scooping. The patch is not a continent. It is a planetary scale pollution system shaped by currents, consumption, and product design. And while plastic is something you can see if you look closely enough, the next deep sea misconception involves something most people never thought to listen for. Number 10. The deep sea is silent. The expected image is total stillness, black water, no movement, no sound. The deep sea is dark, but it is not silent. Sound travels faster and farther in seawater than in air, roughly 1,500 meters per second versus 340 meters per second. Low-frequency sound can travel hundreds or even thousands of kilometers underwater under the right conditions. The deep ocean is, in fact, a layered acoustic environment full of natural, biological, geological, and human-made noise. The mainstream theory describes the ocean's soundscape as a layered system. Natural sources include earthquakes, storms, breaking waves, rainfall, and ice activity. Biological sources include whales, fish, and crustaceans. Geological sources include hydrothermal vents and undersea volcanic activity. Human sources include shipping, sonar, seismic surveys, and offshore construction. The historical and perceptual framing notes that humans assume silence simply because we cannot hear underwater unaided. Our ears are designed for air. The fringe and speculative framing sometimes treats abyssal silence as a kind of cosmic emptiness, but instruments tell a very different story. Earthquakes generate low-frequency seismic sound that propagates through entire ocean basins. Distant cyclones and surface storms produce detectable underwater rumble, picked up by hydrophones thousands of kilometers from the storm center. Typhoons in the western Pacific create some of the loudest natural events in deep recordings. Whale calls dominate certain frequency bands. Baleen whale moans, including the long song of the blue whale at frequencies near 20 Hz, can carry across ocean basins. Sperm whale clicks, used for echolocation during deep dives, are among the loudest animal sounds ever recorded, exceeding 230 decibels at the source. Fish produce grunts, hums, knocks, and croaks, often during spawning. Snapping shrimp, despite their small size, generate enormous local noise through cavitation bubbles produced when they snap their claws. Hydrothermal vents contribute fluid flow, bubbling, and venting sounds. Polar oceans add ice quakes, the sound of ice cracking and shifting. Human contributions are significant. Commercial ship engines and propellers produce continuous low-frequency noise that has measurably increased ambient sound levels in the global ocean over the past century. Seismic surveys used by the oil and gas industry to image subsurface geology fire compressed air guns that produce intense pulses. Naval sonar systems generate powerful directed sound. Passive acoustic monitoring, performed using fixed and drifting hydrophone arrays, has revolutionized marine science by detecting animals in events that cameras cannot see. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization operates a global hydroacoustic network that has incidentally recorded whales, icebergs, and storms in addition to its primary monitoring purpose. Modern research increasingly examines noise pollution as a stressor that masks animal communication, navigation, mating signals, and foraging cues. The abyss is not silent. It is an acoustic archive of life, weather, geology, and industry. So why have so many of these mistaken pictures of the ocean lasted as long as they have? Each of the 10 myths just covered begins with a real phenomenon and then exaggerates it in a specific direction. The Bermuda Triangle takes real Atlantic storms and traffic and turns them into supernatural disappearances. Shark biology takes real ram ventilation in some species and turns it into a universal death rule. Barotrauma takes real decompression injury and turns it into exploding monsters. The Mariana Trench takes real measured depth and turns it into bottomless mystery. Ocean exploration percentages take real ignorance and turn it into a single misleading figure. Giant squid take real cephalopod biology and turn it into ship-killing monsters. Pressure takes a real hazard and turns it into instant bodily destruction. Tsunamis take real coastal walls and project them onto open water. The garbage patch takes a real plastic concentration and reframes it as a solid island. Deep sea silence takes real darkness and assumes acoustic emptiness. Several cognitive and cultural factors keep these myths alive. Humans remember vivid images far better than technical explanations. Narrative compression takes complicated systems and reduces them to one simple picture. Where scientific data is sparse, imagination fills in the gaps. The ocean is particularly fertile ground for this because it hides causes, bodies, debris, and timelines from direct view. Media incentives reward mystery. A documentary titled The Bermuda Triangle Conspiracy attracts more attention than a documentary titled Ordinary Atlantic Weather Patterns and Their Statistical Effects on Shipping Loss Rates. Educational shortcuts contribute as well. A teacher who tells students that we have explored only 5% of the ocean is communicating something true in spirit, but the version that survives in memory loses all the qualifications. The mainstream view treats myths as functional mental shortcuts that help people grasp something hard to imagine. The historical and folkloric contrast notes that old sailor lore and modern internet speculation use different formats but rely on similar emotional logic. Both depend on dramatic imagery, social transmission, and the satisfying feeling that something extraordinary is being revealed. Myths are not random errors. They are stories built where evidence is hard to see. And the ones that survive longest tend to map onto fundamental human anxieties about scale, depth, darkness, and the unknown. So, what tools have actually replaced this kind of folklore in the modern ocean? The shift from sailor testimony to instrumental data took place gradually over the 20th and 21st centuries. Modern oceanography depends on a layered toolkit, each instrument extending human senses into environments where direct experience is impossible. The Global Positioning System reached full operational capability in 1993, providing precise location data anywhere on Earth. The Automatic Identification System, mandated by the International Maritime Organization for most commercial vessels above 300 gross tons starting in 2004, broadcasts identity, speed, heading, and position. Satellite weather monitoring, operated by agencies including the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites, tracks storms in real time. Multi-beam sonar maps seafloor shape with high resolution. Side-scan sonar produces images of wreckage, seabed texture, and debris fields by towing a sensor near the bottom. Remotely operated vehicles, abbreviated ROVs, deliver cameras, manipulator arms, and sampling tools to depth via tether. The ROV Jason, operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, has logged thousands of dives. Autonomous underwater vehicles, abbreviated AUVs, operate without tethers on programmed missions. Vehicles like Sentry, also from Woods Hole, and the AutoSub series from the United Kingdom's National Oceanography Center map ocean ridges, hydrothermal vents, and under-ice environments. Deep-sea landers are baited or instrumented platforms that sit on the seafloor and record video, water chemistry, and animal visits over hours or days. Pressure-retaining samplers allow animals and microbes to be brought to the surface without decompression. Environmental DNA, often shortened to eDNA, lets researchers detect species presence by collecting and sequencing genetic material from seawater samples. Satellite altimetry, pioneered by missions like TOP-EX Poseidon, launched in 1992 and continued by the Jason satellite series, infers broad seafloor features from sea surface gravity anomalies. The DART Tsunami Buoy network detects passing tsunami waves through pressure sensors. Hydrophones provide passive acoustic monitoring of whales, earthquakes, storms, and ship noise across entire ocean basins. Animal tags reconstruct ecosystem dynamics by tracking sharks, whales, squid, sea turtles, and seals across thousands of kilometers. Acoustic telemetry uses sound signals to track tagged animals and instruments through arrays of receivers. Modern deep-sea cameras provide visual proof that replaces surface distorted specimen photographs and imagined silhouettes. Each instrument recovers a piece of knowledge that human senses cannot capture. Together, they support conservation, fisheries management, hazard warning, cable routing, scientific exploration, and the increasingly contested question of deep-sea mining. With these instruments in hand, the deep ocean stops looking like a monster zone and starts looking like an interconnected system. The deep ocean is best understood as a vertically structured system shaped by light, pressure, temperature, currents, chemistry, and biological adaptation. The classic zones taught in marine biology courses are the epipelagic or sunlight zone above 200 meters, the mesopelagic or twilight zone from 200 to 1,000 meters, the bathypelagic or midnight zone from 1,000 to 4,000 meters, the abyssopelagic or abyssal zone from 4,000 to 6,000 meters, and the hidalpelagic or hidal zone in the trenches below 6,000 meters. Light declines rapidly with depth. By 200 meters, only about 1% of surface light remains. By 1,000 meters, no sunlight penetrates. This shapes vision, hunting strategies, predator avoidance, and the prevalence of bioluminescence as a communication and camouflage tool. Most deep water is cold, near 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, but remarkably stable. Pressure increases with depth, structuring anatomy, equipment design, and protein chemistry. Currents continue to move deep water, transporting heat, oxygen, carbon, larvae, and pollutants through the global thermohaline circulation, sometimes called the Great Ocean Conveyor. Marine snow, the continuous fall of organic particles from upper ecosystems, delivers food to the deep. Food scarcity drives many deep animals toward energy conservation, slow metabolism, and long lifespans. Bioluminescence, produced through chemical reactions involving luciferin and luciferase enzymes, occurs in fish, squid, jellyfish, and microorganisms. It serves multiple functions including counter-illumination camouflage, prey attraction, mate signaling, and predator distraction. Chemosynthesis powers entirely separate ecosystems at hydrothermal vents where microbes convert chemical energy from hydrogen sulfide and methane into biomass that supports tube worms, clams, shrimp, and crabs without any sunlight at all. Vents were first discovered in 1977 by researchers aboard the submersible Alvin near the Galapagos Rift, fundamentally rewriting biology textbooks. Trenches act as sediment traps in biological laboratories where pressure-adapted life flourishes. Surface gyres connect to deep systems through sinking debris and drifting larvae, tying garbage patch dynamics to deep ecology. Sound channels in the ocean, particularly the SOFAR channel discovered in the 1940s, allow acoustic energy to travel across thousands of kilometers with very low loss. The mainstream theory describes deep-sea life as a product of adaptation to stable extremes. The historical theory acknowledges that early explorers saw isolated weird specimens rather than complete ecosystems. The fringe and speculative theory invites monsters into the unknown, but ecosystems still require energy, reproduction, and habitat regardless of how strange they appear at first glance. The deep sea is central to carbon storage, climate regulation, biodiversity, and resource debates. It is strange not because it is lawless, but because it is so thoroughly governed by physical laws operating at conditions we rarely encounter on land. A documentary built around 10 myths runs the risk of repetition, especially when each segment shares a structural skeleton. The way around that is variation in the technical content of each section while keeping the rhetorical rhythm consistent. Each topic begins with the myth stated plainly, followed immediately by the correction. A vivid image from culture, folklore, news, or media grounds the myth in something the audience already remembers. The technical explanation introduces the mechanism. One number per section, whether depth, pressure, speed, size, percentage, or scale, anchors the topic to measurable reality. Each myth includes a beat explaining why people believed it, focused on the specific cognitive or historical mechanism. Each myth includes a beat explaining what actually happens, focused on the physics or biology involved. Each myth includes a beat explaining what modern tools show, connecting the topic to instrumental verification. The Bermuda Triangle segment focuses on traffic density and weather. The shark segment focuses on respiratory diversity across species. The barotrauma segment focuses on Boyle's law and gas expansion. The Mariana Trench segment focuses on subduction and bathymetric measurement. The exploration segment focuses on competing definitions of the word explored. The giant squid segment focuses on folklore versus the real predator-prey relationship between squid and sperm whales. The pressure segment focuses on gas spaces and pressure gradients. The tsunami segment focuses on wavelength and shoaling. The garbage patch segment focuses on gyres and microplastics. The silence segment focuses on hydrophones and sound propagation. The structural variation comes from the underlying science. One myth opens a door into respiratory biology. Another opens a door into plate tectonics. Another opens a door into wave physics. Another opens a door into acoustics. The architecture works when each segment feels like a different room in the same house, connected by the same corridor of myth correction mechanism evidence. Pacing matters. A 60-minute documentary divided into 10 major segments leaves about 5 to 6 minutes per segment, with additional time for synthesis sections that draw connections across topics. Transitions should feel like turns in an investigation, not a return to the same point. With that scaffold in place, a final synthesis is possible. The 10 myths are wrong, but the ocean is still more extreme than any of them suggest. The Bermuda Triangle is a lesson in how risk perception, traffic density, and bad statistics can manufacture mystery from ordinary maritime hazard. Sharks teach us about biological diversity, where 500 species have evolved different ways to push water across their gills. Barotrauma teaches gas physics. The Mariana Trench teaches plate tectonics, with the Pacific plate sliding into the mantle at speeds measured in centimeters per year. Ocean exploration percentages teach us the importance of definitions, where mapping at 28.7% and visual observation below 0.001% describe the same ocean very differently. Giant squid teach us how folklore can absorb a real animal, then return it to science with sucker scars and beaks recovered from sperm whales. Pressure teaches the difference between force and pressure gradient between an equalized body and a sealed vehicle. Tsunamis teach hidden energy carried in long, fast, low waves across whole ocean basins. The garbage patch teaches us to see invisible pollution systems built from microplastics, gyres, and discarded fishing gear. Deep sea sound teaches us that an environment can be dark and full of acoustic information at the same time. Science does not remove wonder, it redirects wonder toward mechanisms. The deep sea is hard to study because humans evolved for air, surface light, low pressure, and dry land. Every myth collapses under careful measurement, yet every myth points toward a real phenomenon worth understanding. The Bermuda Triangle points toward weather, currents, and statistics. Shark legends point toward respiratory and ecological diversity. Barotrauma points toward the gas laws that govern bubbles, lungs, and swim bladders. The Mariana Trench points toward a planet whose crust recycles itself. Ocean exploration claims point toward how knowledge is measured. Giant squid point toward an ecosystem only sperm whales fully exploit. Pressure points toward fluid mechanics that govern submersibles, divers, and deep-sea proteins. Tsunamis point toward energy transfer across an entire ocean basin. The garbage patch points toward consumer manufacturing, river systems, and ocean circulation. Deep sea silence points toward an entire sensory dimension humans only perceive through instruments. Modern ocean work depends on sonar, satellites, robotics, genetic tools, acoustic monitoring, and pressure engineering. Innovation in this field comes from respecting the fundamental laws of pressure, buoyancy, fluid motion, acoustics, thermodynamics, and evolution. The ocean is not supernatural, but it remains alien to human instinct. The future of ocean discovery will come from tools that let us measure what our senses cannot survive, from autonomous vehicles that range farther than a research ship, from genetic sampling that detects species without ever seeing them, from pressure-retaining containers that bring deep life to the surface intact, and from acoustic networks that listen continuously to a world we cannot enter. The deepest truth about the sea is not that it hides magic. The deepest truth is that reality at depth is already strange enough.